Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most critical but honestly highly overlooked aspects of the energy transition. We spend a ton of time talking about carbon taxes, emission caps, and shiny new green energy investments. But how does the engineering and construction industry actually measure the direct financial hit when the world's rules on carbon suddenly change? Today, we're looking at exactly how abstract climate policies translate into hard, quantifiable financial losses for the companies literally building our world.
And to understand this, we aren't just speculating here. We're looking directly at the official sustainability accounting standards for engineering and construction services. Overseen by the ISSB under the IFRS Foundation, this framework, well, it isn't some fringe environmental wish list. It's a concrete, standardized tool designed specifically for investors. It gives financial markets a uniform way to track and evaluate climate risk across global construction and engineering firms, making sure everyone is measuring the fallout using the exact same yardstick.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the climate risk problem. Second, defining revenue backlog. Third, tracking hydrocarbon cancellations. And finally, the financial fallout.
Let's jump into Section 1, the climate risk problem.
Let's look at the big picture of why these engineering firms are so uniquely vulnerable. This industry is responsible for building the world's infrastructure, right? We're talking massive, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar projects. But as global climate regulations rapidly evolve, we really have to ask ourselves, what happens to a company's future revenue when multi-million-dollar projects in carbon-intensive industries are suddenly at risk? When a government decides, say, to halt a new coal plant or a pipeline permit gets revoked because of environmental concerns, the construction firm contracted to build it doesn't just lose a job, they lose years of projected income. This is a massive vulnerability, just sitting quietly on corporate balance sheets.
The standard really hits the nail on the head here. It points out that several entities in the industry generate a substantial share of the revenue and profits from clients in carbon-intensive industries. Just think about it. Oil and gas developers, mining giants, traditional utility companies. These are massive clients with incredibly deep pockets. But they are the exact same clients whose future capital investments are most threatened by evolving climate regulations. If your best customer's business model is suddenly restricted by new carbon laws, well, your future revenue pipeline as their builder is instantly jeopardized.
Moving on to Section 2, defining revenue backlog.
To accurately measure that climate threat, we need to understand a specific financial metric that acts kind of like a crystal ball for a company's future, and that is its backlog. In the engineering and construction world, backlog is absolutely everything. The standard defines it as the value of projects not completed as of the close of the reporting period. Basically, in simpler terms, it's revenue that is contractually expected in the future but hasn't actually been recognized yet because the work isn't finished. Backlog is essentially the lifeblood of an engineering firm. Investors look at a company's backlog to predict its future health, cash flow, and growth. If the backlog is strong and growing, the company is healthy. But what happens when the projects making up that backlog are suddenly canceled?
That brings us to Section 3, tracking hydrocarbon cancellations.
So we need to see what it looks like when that crystal ball shatters for fossil fuel projects. And the standard provides a highly specific surgical metric to track this exact scenario. It's called metric IFAN 410.2, which measures the amount of backlog cancellations specifically associated with hydrocarbon-related projects. Now, this isn't about general business losses or, losing a bid for a new sports stadium. This metric asks companies to report exactly how much contractually expected revenue was wiped off their books specifically because a fossil fuel project was canceled. It isolates climate transition risk and puts a strict, cold, hard dollar value on it.
Now, to make sure there are no loopholes, the standard is very clear about what actually counts as a hydrocarbon-related project. It strictly targets the entire hydrocarbon value chain. So we're talking about the exploration, extraction, and development of oil, gas, or coal. It covers the transportation and refining infrastructure, things like pipelines and processing plants. It includes fossil fuel-based electricity generation, like building a brand new natural gas power plant. And it even covers associated downstream services. Bottom line, if a construction project is tied to pulling carbon out of the ground, moving it, refining it, or burning it for power, it falls right under this umbrella.
So why do these massive projects get canceled in the first place? Well, the standard outlines several key triggers. A primary cause is a customer's failure to obtain necessary permitting, which often happens because environmental regulations have tightened up. Then there are financing constraints. As more global banks and asset managers just flat out refuse to fund carbon-intensive projects, developers simply run out of money to pay the construction firms. You also see voluntary project cancellations, where a client abandons a project because the long-term economics just don't make sense anymore in a low-carbon world, or maybe they drastically reduce the project scope. Whenever any of these happen, the construction firm has to remove that expected revenue from their backlog. It is worth noting, though, that the standard explicitly excludes cancellations associated with decommissioning projects, since tearing down old fossil fuel infrastructure is actually a necessary part of the transition away from carbon.
And finally, let's dive into Section 4, the financial fallout. So why does tracking this exact metric matter so much to the financial world? Well, let's compare two metrics side by side to see the full picture. On one hand, we have metric 410B1, which tracks the total amount of backlog for hydrocarbon-related projects. That represents the dream, right? The potential future revenues sitting on the books. On the other hand, we have the metric we've been focusing on, 410B2, the actual amount of backlog cancellations. This is the realized climate risk. By contrasting these two numbers, investors can clearly see a before and after effect. They can evaluate exactly how much of a company's promised fossil fuel revenue is actually materializing and how much is just evaporating into thin air due to the climate transition. It acts as a direct gauge of how vulnerable a firm's business model is to a decarbonizing world.
This level of transparency is absolutely crucial. For a long time, climate risk has been treated as this abstract future problem. But the standards make it crystal clear that downside risks are manifesting right now through project delays, cancellations, and diminished long-term revenue growth. Metric 401B.2 takes that abstract idea of climate risk and turns it into a tangible, measurable indicator of lost future revenue. Think about it. If an engineering firm has a high rate of hydrocarbon backlog cancellations year over year, it's a massive red flag for investors that the company is overly reliant on a dying or at least a heavily shrinking sector of the economy.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. As the global transition away from carbon accelerates and regulatory environments become stricter, we have to wonder, are these unbuilt projects the greatest hidden climate risk currently sitting on corporate balance sheets? I mean, how much contractually expected revenue, celebrated in quarterly earnings calls today, is going to simply vanish before a single shovel even hits the dirt? Understanding and tracking these backlog cancellations isn't just about sustainability reporting, it's about fundamental financial survival in the 21st century. Definitely keep this in mind the next time you look at the projected growth of the companies building our infrastructure.